All right, good morning, everybody. So today we're going to solve all of the mysteries of the universe. You ready? Okay, so for those of you that were not here, I'm going to give a very, very brief recap of what we've learned in this discourse. It's very important that we kind of give context to what we've been studying so that we understand how the conversation is going to continue today. So the basic premise here that is important for us to start with is this notion that in Jewish teachings, especially in the teachings of Jewish mysticism, the sin of Adam and Eve, the sin of the garden, was a setup. God set them up. Adam was a perfect creation of God. He had no evil inclination. So we must say that when he ate of the tree, he was following God's instruction. But God didn't actually instruct him. God hinted to him that he needed to eat of the tree. And we note this from the verse that says that God says to him, don't eat of the tree, because on the day that you eat of the tree, you will surely die. When you have, when you're God and you're talking to someone who doesn't have an evil inclination, why do you have to give them the consequence? You just say, don't do it, and you listen, because you have no reason not to listen. So Adam, who understood that his soul's origin was from a very high spiritual place, he was conscious of that, and understood that his soul was not at the same spiritual level it was before creation, even if the world into which he was formed was a world that godliness was perceived everywhere, but it was still a physical reality that was permeated with divinity. But it begged the question, why did God take my soul from a very high place and bring it down to this lowly place? What's the purpose of it? And he was stumped. But then when God told him that he shouldn't eat of the tree, because on the day that he eats of the tree, he'll surely die, so he understood that he was intended to eat of the tree, and in so doing, he created a mix of that which was in the tree, which was the tree of good and tree of knowledge, good and evil. And now there's a playing field. Now we have good and evil mixed together, and we have this opportunity to have choice and to choose good over evil, etc., etc. With that introduction, we now go to the questions of the discourse, which is that the serpent comes to Chava and says to her, you can eat of the tree, don't worry about it, because on the day that you eat of the tree, you will be like God. I'm not quoting the verse correctly. On the day that you eat of the tree, your eyes will open and you'll be godlike, and therefore you will live forever. So where did the serpent know this from? Where did he get this information? Number one. Number two, God then talks to the angels and he says, now that Adam ate of the tree, now that humans have eaten of the tree, we need to get rid of them from the Garden of Eden, because they may eat of the tree of life and then live forever. Now that they are Yodei Tov V'Ra, they know good and evil, now they may eat of the tree of life and live forever. On a simple meaning, that means that now that they possess this information of good and evil, if they live forever, they'll be like God, knowing good and evil. Okay, so what's wrong with that? If God knows good and evil, and the angels know good and evil, what's wrong if humans know good and evil? So what's the problem with the setup? And not only that, if the issue is living forever, well, they were going to live forever before they ate of the tree anyway. That was the plan. That was the program. So what changed there? What's really going on? So what we began to discuss is this idea that there is a concept of knowing something in the periphery. I know that something is, but it's impersonal, doesn't affect me. So the notion of good and evil as a concept, as an entity, fine, it's no big deal. The angels knew of good and evil, God knows of good and evil, but it's got nothing to do with them. It's just this thing. But there's something different about the human experience in the act of Adam and Eve eating of the tree. Something changes as it relates to this concept of good and evil, which we're going to begin with that in today's discussion. But just before I jump in, any questions or comments on what I just recapped?
I would say because supposedly nothing comes without an intention. I mean, the tree wouldn't even be there without purpose, right? Nothing would be there without a reason for it to be. Is that-
So that's where Adam understood that he needed to eat of the tree. But the question is, now that Adam ate of the tree, in other words, if our concern is that he's going to live forever, he was supposed to live forever before. If our concern is he knows good and evil, well, the angels know good and evil, and so does God. So if that isn't a problem for them, why is it going to be a problem for Adam? Obviously, it's a problem. But the question is, what's the problem?
Oh, but they ingested it, though, took it into itself, which is maybe a little bit different. I love that how you're pointing out, like, periphery versus ingestion is different.
Yeah, so that's called, the periphery in Hebrew is called makif. Makif means to encompass or surround. And we know of things, they're out there. They got nothing to do with us. They don't affect us. But when it comes to internal knowledge, it changes. So let's go to page 10. Bottom of the page. There's plenty of copies if you would like. Here. You're welcome. So the human, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, it is an internalized experience. And therefore the good is mixed with the evil literally. Let's rewind just a little bit. When it comes to negative, everything ultimately needs divine energy to sustain it. But there is a divine energy that's transmitted in a personal way, and there's divine energy that's transmitted in an impersonal way. What gets divine energy in a personal way? What gets divine energy in an impersonal way? So we can understand from analogy within our lives, there are things that we do very impersonally. I hope you don't make a lot of meaning in taking out your garbage to the street. It's just something you do, right? And sometimes you can do things that are so impersonal that you don't even pay attention to the details. It's not that important. Are you rolling your cart, your garbage can down this way or down that way? You just got to get it to the street. It's not a very meaningful event. The things that are important to us, we engage with in a very personal way. The things that are impersonal, we engage with in an impersonal way. The negative forces in the world, God gives it its life in an impersonal way. It's necessary, but it's not where God's interest is, right? Where's God's interest? God's interest is in the moment when we choose good over evil. In order for us to choose good over evil, there has to be evil. And then we choose good over evil. So the evil is a necessary part of the picture. You know, even in like the set of life, right? What was that movie called? You know, everybody knows what I'm talking about. What is it? No. Come on. Everybody reads my mind here. Did you say The Truman Show? Yes, that's one. I thought you said The German Show. The Truman Show. Yes, The Truman Show. No, he got it. We're on the money here. The Truman Show, right? So there's a set, right? So in a sense, what's fascinating about the movie is that really, in a sense, it's life, right? Where the whole reality of existence is a set, and we're the actor in the set, right? God set the whole thing up, and the spotlight is shining on us and saying, how are you going to show up in the set? The set is not where the show is. It's just necessary to be there, right? You're the actor, you're the event, you're the feature of the show. So in order for this set to work, there has to be stuff. And some of that stuff is good, some of that stuff is neutral, and some of that stuff is technically bad. Meaning it's bad in the sense that its objective is to create challenge for us and to tempt us away from good. So it's there. And God gives it life, but he gives it in an impersonal way. But we are the focus of attention. So our relationship is very personal. And therefore, what goes on with us is not passive. Which, by the way, means that when you take your garbage out, it's not a passive event either. It may be from a materialistic standpoint, but nothing about us is passive. everything about our existence and everything about what we do is meaningful and significant. Granted, we don't have to give too much meaning to the garbage, but before we drink our coffee, we say a blessing. Let's get focused. What's the purpose? I'm not just I'm not just acting on instinct, trying to quench my my need for caffeine. It's actually potentially a meaningful event. Granted, drinking a coffee is not as meaningful as helping an older person across the street, or wrapping tefillin, but it's important. So let's give it some meaning. Let's give it some depth. Let's be present. It's a personal. It's an internalized personal experience. So eating of the tree is not impersonal. It's not the good and evil that's out there. It's very, very personal. It's a very internalized type of experience. So what's the result of that? The result of it is as the verse says, this is why God says, now Adam will be like one of us, knowing good and evil. Pehirish, this means shehu hayagam ken ka'achad mimenu. Pehirish kamoisha bebechinas achdus. Dainu l'mayla yadua hatevara kein hayagam hu hayidei shatame itzadas murav tevara avalei adavar mazim. The Alter Rebbe gives us a play on the words. Behold, man is ka'achad. He possesses the oneness like us, like we. In other words, the divine, everything is unified there. There's nothing that's periphery there. In truth, everything is part of the master design, right? If we we strive to move into that state of consciousness, right? That's what we're all sitting here because we want to tap into something a little deeper, right? All of life, anybody who lives a meaningful life is striving to tap into a deeper dimension. What does that mean? We're tapping, what are we looking for? We're looking to see that things are unified. We're looking to see that which appears to be fragmentation is really an expression of the same single divine entity. The angels get that because they have that vantage point. God, of course, has that because he has that vantage point. There's a oneness there. By the way, when we say Shema, we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Hear O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. We don't say God is singular, which would make more sense. But we say God is one. One means that there's other things. But in all the other things, in all the fragmentation, you have the expression of the same oneness. How do we get there? How do we as humans get there? Shema Yisrael. We contemplate it. We think about it. We study it. We meditate on it. And when we do that, we suddenly say, whoa, this is not a jungle. This world, it's all interconnected. We just don't see it necessarily naturally with our physical eyes, but we can see it with our brain, and we surely can see it with our soul, but we have to invest in getting there. So God is saying now, man who now possesses oneness like we do, now we got a problem. Because for us, God and the angels, the knowledge that evil is there doesn't affect them because it's periphery. So they can see that evil is a necessary and an expression of the divine, and yet it doesn't affect them. But humans take it in because our whole identity is an internalized one. So we can't take evil into our body, into our consciousness, and it shouldn't have an effect on us. So now we have to deal with the situation. And again, just parenthetically, because I think it's really important, it's not like God said, oh, we made a mistake here. It was as part of the plan. This was a setup, but we're following the setup. This is the next scene, and the setup is, okay, now that you ate of it, now we got a problem. So therefore, we have to take the next action, which is move them out of the Garden of Eden. Does this make sense?
I'll say what, I got one point of view, I also ask the problem of both were created. So even how would they connect to both sides? Never happened, right? So why is it a problem? It connects it to me. So I'm saying, like, telling me God had good and evil, the angels had good and evil, the people were just happy good, I guess. Maybe that's what you're saying. Well, they don't.
Before the sin. Before the sin, they had only good.
So then how could they connect it to what was there without that happening?
So,
I guess.
yeah, so I guess we have to dance between the literalness of the story and the deeper dimension of the story. And that's part of the paradox of Torah study, is we accept the premise that the Torah is literal, even as it is mystical and so on and so forth. Adam and Chava ate of the tree. They ingested into their bodies whatever this tree was. By the way, who knows what kind of tree it was? Fred, you know. No? No. Fig. It was a fig tree. It was a fig tree, according to the Medrash. And the commentaries say that the reason why the Torah didn't tell us is so that we shouldn't look at fig trees and say, oh, that's the tree that Adam and Eve sinned with, right? But one of the reasons that they were, the clothing that was made for them was from fig leaves, was because there's a notion that the very thing within which we sin becomes the tool for redemption, becomes a tool for atonement. Okay, that's a total parenthetical. But the idea is they ate of the tree. The tree represented and contained within it exactly how that worked, I don't know, but it's not hard to contemplate that God concentrated the energy of good and evil into this tree, and they ingested it into their being. So now, in their being, you've got good and evil. You've got this mixture inside. When they had only good, it was perfect. They were in a Garden of Eden. They were in a world that was all godly. It was all beautiful, and everything was good. But now, being in that garden of divinity and possessing evil as well is a bad recipe. What's it for? What's the whole purpose there?
I think it's interesting, Rabbi Kusterman. It's something that just occurred to me recently. I was listening to somebody talk about this. They pointed out they didn't get kicked out when they ate the fruit or disobeyed God. It was actually after they did that, their idea of separation from God happened, and that's why they hid. And then, so it's like when shame entered our subconscious, that was actually what, and it was almost so, if that's true, God wasn't mad at them for eating or whatever the fruit. It was what the fruit was going to do to our minds, making us feel inferior.
It was the result, the effect of the fruit. Yeah,
right,
yeah.
Is a fascinating. I don't know if you've ever had that thought.
Well, I mean, I hear that. I think it's I see it as a continuum, right? You know, what happens when you only have a divine consciousness? Then there is no shame. But when we sin, by definition, we create disconnect. And when we create disconnect, we no longer are, the divine consciousness no longer dominates. So what takes up space? Our consciousness, our own consciousness. Once our own consciousness takes up space, now we have to contend with the self. And the self, by definition, is going to have shame around it. So, which is why they noticed that they were naked. What happened before? They were naked, but they didn't notice it because they weren't even aware of self in the way they were aware of God. You know, Payman's not here today, but he always asks the question about where do we know this information from? And I always answer him that the Rebbes, they lived in a different dimension, right? We see a physical reality, and we lean on these great teachers to tell us what do they see, right? But they see a different dimension. And in that dimension, it's not novel. That's just what they see. They see, right? When you do any kind of self-work, you begin to hear things differently. It's the same words, but you hear it differently. And you see things differently. If you're not getting this, I don't mean like voodoo, like suddenly you just process information differently, intellectually, emotionally, psychologically, visually, right? Things just change. Adam and Eve were in the same physical reality that we are in. But in this physical reality, they saw a spiritual dimension. They saw the divinity within the existence around them because they didn't take up space in their own consciousness. Only God took up space, which only emphasizes even more so how the whole thing is a setup. Because if you're in the Garden of Eden, how do you sin? You can't sin, right? Even the Jewish people at Sinai, we ask the question, how is it? We have to navigate this very complicated question, how the Jewish people stood at Sinai, witnessed the greatest divine revelation that humans had, and then 40 days later worship a golden calf. How's that possible? Okay, so we analyze it and we come to all kinds of interesting conclusions. But Adam and Eve were in an even higher dimension. A, they had no evil inclination. B, everything around them was godliness. So how do you come to sin? Unless in your sin, you're doing what God wants. Now we understand the story. Okay, but the question is, what happened here in eating of the tree? In eating of the tree, good and evil got mixed in. And now something's changed for the human experience. Let's read a few more paragraphs. It'll become clarified a little bit. Middle of second paragraph, page 11. Humans come from the level of pnimius, from this internalized place within God. Therefore, we, in this physical reality, right? Because we're again, this is not a Kabbalistic mystical idea. It is, but it's a very practical idea. Because we're the focal point of God's creation, so therefore, we are intimately connected with God. We are an internal being. We're not part of the periphery, right? We have to remember that we human beings are not part of the periphery. We are the focal point. I remember years ago, I went to Universal Studios and in California. I'm from California. We went to Universal Studios and I must have been a young teenager. And there was an animal show. They were showing how they train the animals for the movies and stuff like that. And the MC gets up and says, you have all kinds of animals. You have these, birds and crawling animals. And then there's us animals. And I said, I'm not an animal. I'm not an animal. And I hadn't really studied much Hasidic philosophy at that time, which I later came to understand that we possess an animal dimension, but I'm not an animal. Animals are animals. I can act like an animal. I have certain similarities to animals. I have instincts like animals, but I'm not an animal. I am the focal point of creation, as are you. So if I'm the focal point of creation, there's nothing about me that's periphery. So when I do something, it goes in. It's not passive. We can't do things passively, right? What is that book? The Body Keeps the Score. Like nothing happens to us. We scientifically in psychological medicine today and in many fields, we realize like things have an impact. The body keeps the score because we're not a peripheral being. So everything that happens to us, everything we experience lives in some part of this system here. So eating of the tree is not a passive event because we're not a passive being. We're created from God's internal dimension. We're God's focal point. So it's it's not as it is above. It's not like it is above, where there can be this knowledge of evil, but the being remains unaffected by it. It remains peripheral. That makes sense there because all of those beings are encompassing beings. They're peripheral beings in the first place. But a person who comes from this inner dimension of God, when he will also know about evil, then he himself becomes mixed in with the evil. Because when you are an internal being, listen to this next paragraph. It's very, very powerful. When you're an internal being, it's impossible to completely separate the evil from within us. It's there. It's got to live there somewhere. So once it's there, it becomes very difficult to separate out the evil that's within us. It's an extremely intense and difficult battle. And as the Torah says, that it's a reference between it's a conversation that when Rebecca was pregnant, she felt this struggle inside of her, and the Torah tells us that she went to Shem, and she asked, "What is this struggle?" And he said, "You have two nations inside of you, and they will struggle with each other. and one nation overpowers the other nation. In other words, it's always like this. It's always a struggle. So the Alter Rebbe is borrowing that term to refer to our inner struggle, which is the same inherent struggle, right? There's the struggle within us. There's a nation that wants dominance over the body, and there's another nation that wants dominance over the body. The godly dimension wants dominance over the body, and the animal wants dominance over the body. And they're at odds with each other. They struggle with each other. And when one nation wins, the other one is knocked down. What does that mean? Since the good and evil is mixed into us, so we have to constantly be on guard. We're always at war within ourselves. Sometimes this side wins and sometimes the other side wins. We'll pause and then we'll go on. Any questions or comments on that?
Guess you can survive with the animal side, but not, don't have to have the spiritual side. Interesting. Actually.
Say that again.
Survive with the animal side only. So it's interesting how you create it that way. In reality, you don't eat, you're gonna die, right? If you don't say, if you don't do something, you don't do the other side, it's still one of those processes. It's not gonna,
Right, you're not going to get struck down. Yeah.
make it slow down, but at least,
You're not going to die from within. Yeah, so
easy to see, more functional.
So what does that tell you, actually? I'm going to go somewhere with you. What does that tell you about the animal soul?
Has a louder voice.
Say that again.
It has a louder voice, it's stronger.
And when something has a louder voice and is stronger, what does that tell you?
Needs to be redirected.
It's more powerful, needs to be redirected. So the fact is that, again, we don't know why God created the world, but we know what the program is. God tells us what the program is. The program is that God wanted to have a dwelling place in this world below. We're in a perpetual game of hide and seek with God. He's hiding in plain sight, and our job is to say, oh, game up, I see you're here. That challenge, no, I see it's you. That situation, I see it's you. That inner struggle, I see it's you, right? But he didn't put us in heaven to have this struggle. He put us on earth with all the physicality and all the fierce drive of the body, the drive for survival, the instinct for existence, the fierceness of ego, the joy of eating food, right? All of this physicality tells us that energy is so powerful. But the way we transform it is by harnessing it. Some of it needs to be discarded. When its temptation is for something that's prohibited, we have to discard it. But the energy itself is a powerful one. So we have the ability to look at that and say, wow, that is a powerful force. How do I take that force and use it out in a good way? The key is to separate out the evil. By the way, just for fun, we'll do a parenthetical, a little bit of a long one. We see what's going on in the Middle East right now. Israel's been taken out. A lot of Hamans, a lot of pharaohs have been meeting their end. What's really fascinating is what lies at the core. What lies at the core of all of these evil beings? So the Torah, we just started the Torah, but in a book and a half, we're going to come to the story when God tells Moses to go to Pharaoh. Not at the beginning, but later on in the story, God tells Moses to go to Pharaoh. But the Torah uses an interesting term. It doesn't say go to Pharaoh. It says come to Pharaoh. And the Zohar tells us that Moses was afraid. He was afraid to go to Pharaoh. And God said, don't be afraid, I'll go with you. So come together to Pharaoh. What was he going to experience that he hadn't experienced before? It wasn't the first time going to Pharaoh. I think this was at the beginning of the 8th plague. What was he going to experience that he hadn't experienced before? So the Zohar says that God says to him, I want you to go to Pharaoh, and I'm going to show you the great light that is Pharaoh. great light, that's Pharaoh. Moses says, I'm afraid of that. I don't want to see the great light. What could be so great about looking at this evil being? So what lies at the core of that evil?
God can harden his heart, Pharaoh. You go to harden his heart.
So what happens when the heart is hardened? What is, give me a different word for a person whose heart is hardened. Stubborn, or the hatred is a byproduct of arrogance, of ego. Those are all a byproduct of a sense of I'm invincible. I'm all powerful. There's no consequences for me. Or, as Pharaoh actually believed, I am God. I'm God. I'm all powerful. My wife's uncle is a retired chaplain in the U.S. Army, and after the Gulf War, when they got rid of Saddam, it was around Purim time, and they read the Megillah in Saddam's palace on his throne. He built a throne like Solomon. He built a throne to model after Solomon's throne, right? Guy's off his rocker, but he's actually not off his rocker. He just thought he was a god. And when you think you're a god, you can do anything you want. You're above any kind of reproach. So how does a person come to think that they're like God? Does anybody in this room ever think they're like God? I do. How do we get that notion? How do we come to think we're like God?
We're made in the image. We have the divine ruach.
Oh, good. So then what is ego really?
Thinking you're higher. No.
What is ego really? If my ego comes from the fact that I am created in the divine image, so what is my ego? It is the divine image. It is the divine image. My ability to see myself as an independent being is because God injected himself into my essential consciousness that I'm a self-made being. I'm a microcosm of the divine. I'm a microcosm of everything, right? Okay, the problem is when I forget that God made me in his image, right? God made me in his image. So yes, I am godlike. I am very powerful. I can create because God made me so. And not only that, I have free choice. I'm the only thing that has free choice. Nothing else has free choice except for the human being. So I'm very much godlike. So what happens when evil, when the light shines on the evil, when the evil, okay, so in the case of the pharaohs and so on, it's a little bit more difficult, but what happens when the light shines on our ego, right? When we put up all of our resistances and then somebody gives us a perspective that shows us that we are caught up in ourselves, it all melts, right? We may put up a lasting fight because we don't want to give up our ego, but eventually we surrender. When you find a little humility, you give up. But where's the humility coming from? It's a recognition that I'm not God. I'm godlike, but I'm not God. And whatever I have that's godlike comes from God. The evil dictators, the wicked people, are people who never give up the fight. The only way to get rid of them for the most part is by killing them, eliminating them. But in the case of Pharaoh, God says to Moses, let's go. I'm going to show you what he's really all about. In these last 3 plagues, the light's going to come on for Pharaoh. And according to one opinion in the Midrash, Pharaoh repented. According to one opinion in the Midrash, Pharaoh repented. Because when the light came on, the resistance broke and he had to let the people go. What is this? What's the point of all this? The point of all this is for us to recognize the deep struggle that's inside of us. It's a very real struggle. And it's a result of eating of the tree. We now have this good and evil mixed into us. And it's a constant battle. It's a battle between having this deep divine connection, but having this powerful force of the body and the animal soul that's driving us. Available to be harnessed, but very, very powerful driver that oftentimes makes it difficult, if not almost impossible, to overcome it, which is one of my favorite parallels between the 12 steps and the teachings in the Torah. Is there's a passage in the Talmud that it says, if not for the fact that God helps us, we would never be able to overcome the evil inclination. It's a powerful machine. It's a powerful being. It's got a very high divine source. So we need God's help to be able to overcome it.
The whole process, 10 miles and this and that, it seems just to keep refining your soul, because it makes you elevate higher and higher. Is that the purpose of all this stuff going on here?
Yes, but switch it a little bit. It's not about, your soul doesn't need any refining. Your soul's perfect for your body. Your body, it's to refine your body. The whole point, which is why we in death, in Jewish tradition, we treat the body with great respect, because the body is the objective. So we lay the body to rest.
You said something earlier that got me on a train of thought I've never had before, and I don't know if I can put it into words, but the serpent comes, Eve, and says, you're going to be like God. So I was always thought that was a lie. But if there's, which every lie has an element of truth to it, so if that's true, is there some sense in which God has what we think of as evil, which is all these things you're talking about as like animalistic forces, but he always channels them in the proper way? Is that the difference between the way we wrestle and he does, or do you feel like there's none of that?
No, God doesn't, according to Jewish teachings, God has, there's no negativity within the divine whatsoever.
Right. I know there's no evil in God, but I'm like, I wonder, I know I come kind of going against scripture there, but I'm wondering if evil is a force, it's the same force bent. If that makes any sense, or if
so in a certain sense, evil is not real. In a certain sense, yeah. Right? Evil is the absence of the divine light, right? So as soon as the light comes on, evil ceases to be. But interesting that so there's no counterforce to the divine. There's only the divine and there's the concealment. However, specifically around the animal force, the animal soul, this drive, it's brought down in many teachings of Kabbalah that if you're familiar with the prophecy of Yechezkel, of Ezekiel, when he ascended to heaven and he witnessed all the heavenly hosts and the angels, and then he saw the divine chariot. Yeah. And on the divine chariot were some animals, right? Who remembers which animals? An ox, yeah. A lion and an eagle, right? And then it says, and on the throne, there was that which appeared to have the appearance of a man, right? So again, God forbid, God doesn't have any form, but there's this notion of this divine being. The animals, we came up with a book name yesterday. It's called oh, come on, what was a good name? Sugar and lemon from heaven, or something like that. Sugar and lemon from heaven. Where's the sweetness of sugar come from? It comes from the divine attribute of chesed. Where does the bitterness of lemon come from? It comes from the divine attribute of gevura, of severity. Everything in our physical reality is just an evolved spiritual energy manifest in the physical, right? So animals are a manifestation of the divine animals of the chariot. Just as they descend into a physical reality, they become animals. And so is the animal within us. It's a manifestation. The difference is that the animals have no divine consciousness. So they're just animals. They're just robots doing what they're programmed to do. But we have a divine consciousness, so we are able to take the consciousness of the animal soul, which comes from the divine chariot, and channel it somewhere. But what's inside of us is the manifestation of the divine chariot. It's an unbelievable notion. We're not an animal. I'm not a rudderless being. I'm not a pre-programmed entity. I have a drive. I have a force which comes from this very holy place, which means, hey, what can I do with this? How can I take this force and drive it into a good place? Let's keep on going. Second paragraph, page 12. Like we see in the souls of Israel from the beginning of the generations until now, Shayakama ita mishunim. There were various different periods in history. There were generations that had very lofty souls, and they were able to conquer over the evil that was within themselves. Conversely, there were other generations where there were many evil people, and in those generations, the evil overcame the people. Why do we have this dichotomy? All souls ultimately descend from the first man, from Adam. And Adam himself had these distinctions. Sometimes Adam his godly dimension overpowered, and sometimes his animal dimension, the evil, overpowered. Why? Why is there such an intense struggle? You know what I've been mentioning this a lot over the high holiday season. It's like you wake up in the morning and you feel angst, right? What do you want? What's your hope for the day? If you can articulate the hope, it's just like let everything just run smoothly. I don't want any emotional highs. I don't want any emotional lows. I don't want to bump into any major challenges. I don't want to just let it all just go. We just want equilibrium, right? Sorry, it ain't happening. And when we embrace that because of its origin, then we can begin to live life. What's the origin? The origin is Adam. Adam struggled. And that's the reality. If you're going to have good and evil mixed into you, it's going to be a struggle. Sometimes this is going to win and sometimes that's going to win. It's going to be a struggle. But that's the purpose. It's not a bad thing. It may not be so pleasant, but it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. That's where life is lived. The goal is to see if today you can do more good and less bad than you did yesterday. The goal is to see if you learned from yesterday's lessons to show up a little differently today. Maybe a little bit of that animal soul that became coarsened can become a little bit more refined. Can I start my day with a little divine meditation to anchor myself? Can I focus a little less on my ego and a little more on my purpose? That's what it's all about. And some days you'll be successful at it. And you're going to say, wow, I've arrived. And then the next day, you get knocked out and you're back to where you started. And you pick yourself up and you keep on going, right? This is our story because this is how it was with Adam. Constant struggle. Why? Because Adam's origin is in this internal dimension of God. As soon as he became knowledgeable of the concept of evil, it got mixed into him. Therefore, it became very difficult, and a great battle to be able to separate the good from the evil from the good, sometimes this way and sometimes that way, sometimes the good overpowers and sometimes the evil overpowers. And if we look at the story, it's also very literal in the story. An interesting commentary tells us, it's a Rashi that we read this week. It says, Vayeda Adam es Chava Ishta, and Adam knew Eve, his wife. And Rashi focuses on the grammar and tells us that I'm not a grammarian and I'm not going to attempt to explain it exactly, but Rashi basically says that the verse is teaching us that before they were expelled from the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve already had relations. So it was before the sin that they had relations. Why is that important? Because it says they were engaged in relations to produce children, and they didn't have any shame. For them, it was just like they were eating and drinking. Why? Because it's a commandment. If you remember when Adam and Eve were created, in the sixth day of creation, God blesses them and he says, Peru ravu, be fruitful and multiply and fill up the earth and conquer it. So before they sinned, they were given this commandment. And we see Adam followed God's commandments. So he did what he was supposed to do. He ate, because God said, from the trees of the garden you shall eat. So he ate and he drank. And he was intimate with his wife and to produce children. Everything's good. No shame. They didn't even know that there was a physical desire in it. They did it to fulfill God's will. But once they ate of the tree, something changed. Now they know the desire. They're aware of the desire. And now it becomes a challenge to separate oneself from the desiring part of it. Meaning, it's not in our post-sin world, there's nothing wrong with desire in and of itself. There's actually a discourse from the Alter Rebbe from a few weeks ago, where the Alter Rebbe talks about the koyach hamasava, the power of desire. The power of desire is a neutral force, neutral in the sense of good or evil. It's just a force. It's a very powerful force. We can use the power of desire to do amazing things, and we can use the power of desire to do terrible things. It's just a force. So, but we have to contend with it. Before the sin, they didn't have to contend with it. They just did what they were supposed to do. It worked. Everything was fine. Now, after the sin, now there's a power of desire that needs to be analyzed and questioned and contended with. Am I doing this for the right reasons? Am I doing the right thing? Am I just indulging in my own personal satisfaction and so on? Now it becomes a journey. Now we've got to engage with it. So now we're going to go answer the question. And therefore, God did not want Adam and Eve to eat of the tree of knowledge. This is in this paragraph is in the what do they call it when it's above, not the pre-libel state, right? How do you when you have a libel, but you have even in its post-libel, there's this I'm not good with philosophical words. In other words, you have the libel. That's already part of our history. But you have within the history, you have a post-libel and you have a pre-libel, whatever that's called. Anyway, my point is that in the pre-libel state, we're talking about it in a post-libel state. But in its pre-libel state, which in a sense exists also now, right? God didn't want him to eat of the tree. Why? Because the result of it is that it's damaging. Why is it damaging? Because we're not always victorious. We don't always overpower the temptation. Sometimes the evil gets the better of us. God wanted that Adam should know of the evil at all. And God wanted that Adam should be all holy. I didn't mean it like that, all holy. But God wanted him to be holy, all holy. And he did not want to bring him into this intense war. After he already ate of the tree and it got mixed in with the evil, then God says, now we have to make sure he doesn't eat of the tree of life, and then he will eat and live forever. Now that he did eat of the evil, now he did ingest the evil, and now he's going to take of the tree of life. The tree of life, the tree of life's origin is higher than the shattering of the vessels, which I'll explain in a moment. That is the origin of death and the whole existence of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So God didn't want Adam to eat of that, because if he were to eat of that, we'd have a problem. But let's stop here and kind of just see if we got all this, if this information all makes sense. Any questions or comments?
Knowledge is kind of used interchangeably here. Is that that's the way I'm seeing it?
No. He's no. There are two separate things. There's the tree of knowledge. It's the tree they ate of. The concern is now that they ate of the tree of knowledge, there's also the tree of life. If they eat of the tree of life, it's going to give eternal existence to the tree of knowledge. What's the problem with that? If the tree of knowledge was a periphery, that's fine. But now that it's internalized, so essentially they're going to give eternal existence to the good and evil that's mixed in with them. In other words, the battle is worth fighting because every now and then we're going to win. But if you know you're never going to win, you throw in the towel, right? Some fights are just not worth fighting. But there's something about the tree of knowledge that would change the game, which we're gonna dig into that soon. But I want to make sure we got the rest of this down.
was gonna ask real quick, you had stated in the front end that it was all a divine setup for him to eat. And right, and then of course, over here it says, that he didn't want to eat from it, so then how do you reconcile that?
Yeah. So first, I want to prove to you that it was a setup. Okay. I want you to put yourself in the Garden of Eden. You're Adam. And you have a consciousness that you have a soul. And you understand that your soul comes from a very high place. And that your soul is not in that high place anymore. And even though you are in a good place, right? Because you look around and you see divine energy sustaining trees, and you see divine energy sustaining animals, and you have a divine consciousness of God that flows through you. But you know that your soul is not where it was. What's the question you ask yourself? And by the way, Adam is, according to the measure, 75 years old upon creation. So what is he asking himself? What would you ask yourself? What am I doing here? So God says, oh, I put you in the garden, la'avda u'lashamra, to work the garden and to guard it. And you say, okay, what does that mean? What are you working? You're planting apples? Like, what are you doing here? What, God took your soul from such a high place and put it down here for what? Now, if I ask you the question today in 2024, what are you doing here? You don't have to be a Kabbalist. You don't have to be Jewish. You don't have to be a person of faith. You say, I'm here to make the world a better place, to do some good in the time that, right, there's many schools that are not believers in a divine energy. And they say, you know, as long as I'm on this earth, I'm here to do some good in the world, right? That makes sense because the person understands that there's an inner struggle, and they look around the world and they see a world that's not all so good. And they say, oh, I'm going to at least make the best of my time here. There's some good to do here. But how would Adam make the best of his time? Doing what? Cultivating more divine energy. It's already filled with divine energy. It's already filled with divine consciousness. So what's he doing here? So then God speaks to him. And God says, oh, by the way, I got some instructions for you. Be fruitful and multiply. Eat of any of the trees you'd like, just don't touch that one. Because if you eat of it, you'll die. Ooh, I'm going to die. What does that even mean? I had no agenda. I had no intent. I didn't ask to be here. I'm not running anywhere. Like, what do you mean I'm going to die? And he starts thinking to himself, God has a plan here. I'm aware that my soul comes from a very high place, and it must be that in order to get close, you have to go away. You have to go far. But I still don't understand in this world of divine light, where I understand I'm not as close, but how do I get close? There's no struggle, right? I understand that this is not as close as it was before my soul came down, but how do I get there? You got to bump up against something to get there. You got to do something. Now, if we think about the Torah, right, where yesterday we read the first Torah portion, and it says Bereshis, in the beginning. And the Medrash says Bereshis is Beis Rashis. The Torah was created for two reasons. The world was created for two reasons: for the Torah and for the Jewish people. Okay, let's look at the Torah. What does it say in the Torah? It says, "Thou shalt, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. Honor the Shabbos." The Torah says, "You should not commit adultery. You should not murder. You should not covet." Adam says, "I don't got any of these problems." But if the Torah was part of the creative process, there must be something that's got to happen with that, right? This whole process begs a next scene. Sean, do you mind opening the door? I think they're looking to get in. Thank you. The whole process begs another scene. And now we know what that scene is. Adam understood that, he processed it, but now we know what that scene is. Now it makes sense to us. It all makes sense. The whole thing makes sense. The whole flow makes sense. How do I know it makes sense? Because look at us, right? Where are we in the world? Our own consciousness is built on the result of the sin. The whole thing would have no purpose otherwise. Does it make sense? Does that answer your question, Stanley?
This is the problem of this A2 paragraph where it says, God didn't want it set up.
So God didn't want it. It's almost like saying God was compelled by his ultimate desire. In other words, you want to drive a nice car. You want to have a nice house. You want to raise good children. Do you want to work? No. Are you going to work anyway? Yeah, because you want something. You want the nice car. You want the nice house. Are you going to put the effort into raising your children? It's hard as something, right? Raising children is tough. But you're going to do it anyway because you want the result. What did God want? God wanted that we should overcome temptation, that we should overcome the challenge. He didn't want that Adam shouldn't listen to him. He didn't want that Adam shouldn't listen to him. But Adam needed to not listen to him, or in truth, Adam listened to him, right? Because God really did tell him what to do. He just didn't tell it to him straight. Because God wanted something else. I'm looking for that philosophical word that captures that idea that there's an above, there's a super rational wanting here. In the storyline, right, in the narrative, it goes, God doesn't want, Adam disobeys, consequence. But we got to go to the first chapter. The first chapter is that God does want, but he wants that Adam should be the one to make it happen. Why does Adam need to be the one to make it happen? As I mentioned, because if God makes it happen, then it's an eternal mess. Then it's God bringing the evil into existence in this mixture, and we can never play a part in cleaning it up. But because man made the mess, we have the ability to clean it up. But God's true desire, again, and the proof is the whole existence would make no sense otherwise. By the way, the end game is that we go back to that state of being. When we finish our job in the Messianic era, the world returns to its Garden of Eden state. But that's the difference of having returned to the Garden of Eden state after we've done the work, as opposed to it being given to us. Which also begs the question, what's the purpose in the Messianic era? But I'm not worrying about that. That's the objective of creation. We'll get there. It's a paradox that we have to embrace.
So are you saying, you're trying to write all this down somehow, but the struggle is the purpose because in overcoming it, our soul connects back to that high place.
And the way there is through the darkness, through the challenge.
I think in relationship, so it feels like relationship is one of the highest values of the human project, right? So God walked with Adam, and obviously when he took Eve aside, we don't know how long Adam was asleep, but that was just God and Eve alone. So there was like, obviously relationship is huge. So if relationship was the purpose, I have to wonder if sin entering in it, if we follow your train of thought, that it was intentional on God's part. That there's something even as good as that relationship was in that state, that somehow it has to be, the potential for a deepening happens after the fall. Is there some truth in that, or do you not agree with that?
For sure. For sure. It's exactly what it is. It's through the darkness that if you're not burdened, you can't become unburdened. If you don't have darkness, you don't have light. Light is not appreciated. It's not as powerful.
Interesting.
Yeah. We studied a discourse yesterday, which again, I'm just giving you another angle just to prove this point. A beautiful discourse that basically says that it says, behold, it says that it's not good for man to be alone. I will make him a helpmate, right? How does the Torah say? A helpmate against him, right? What the helpmate is through being against. You have to push against something to actually get to the depths of the relationship. So, but the discourse we studied basically made the point that the man being alone is a reference to the supernal man, a reference to God. If God's light just shines, then there's no self-consciousness. And God says that's not good. It's not good for man to be alone. There's no purpose in that. Therefore, I will make him a helpmate against him, meaning that I will conceal my light so that there could be conscious beings. And the conscious beings now have to bump up against something, and then they can serve me. Well, how can both be true? How could this be that God didn't want Adam to eat of the tree? We wouldn't have that setup. The same Torah that tells us that God wanted there to be a Chava, for there to be an Eve, and in its spiritual context that there should be a created world where there's conscious beings. It's the same Torah that's saying that God didn't want him to sin. What would the use of all that be? So we have to conclude that God wanted this to be. But his want wasn't for this. So in that sense, we can say, if you want to get technical, God didn't want Adam to eat of the tree. That wasn't his biggest want. His want was that Adam should overcome the challenge that he faced. Okay, how do we get there? You got to eat of the tree. But that's not what he wanted. He didn't want him to eat of the tree. He wanted him to have the challenge. But the only way to get to that challenge is through eating of the tree. So, ergo, God wanted him to eat of the tree. Huh? Both are true. Both are true. That's what I said at the beginning. It's a paradox, and we live in a paradox.
One-way discussion.
Between God and Adam?
Right. Moses questions God, this and that, but you were just thinking, wasn't really just, like asking for clarification, challenges, nothing, I'm confused on that part.
I'm not familiar. Yeah, I'm not familiar. I haven't read the Medrash on that, so I don't know. All right, enough to think about. FYI, there is not going to be a class next week. I'll send a text reminder on Friday, but there won't be a class next week. We'll pick it up the week after. You are welcome.